On the coldest night of the Boston winter, a mother clutching her children's hands knocks on the door of the one man she swore she'd never see again. And what waits on the other side could save them or destroy them all. Before we dive into this, hit the subscribe button and tell us from where in the world you are watching from. Clara Evans. Now there was a name that carried magic in its syllables. She was the kind of woman who could light up the darkest corner of a room simply by walking into it. Her laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and her eyes lured. Her eyes held depths that could drown a man's sorrows. She worked at Murphy's Diner on Beacon Street, a little place where the coffee was strong and the dreams were stronger. Ethan Cole was 23 when he first laid eyes on her, though. He'd been carrying the weight of 40 years on his shoulders. The heir to the Cole financial empire, a dynasty built on steel and ruthlessness. Yet there he sat in a cracked vinyl booth, watching this slip of a girl refill his coffee cup and feeling something in his chest crack open like an egg. You see, child love doesn't care about your bank account or your family name. It strikes like lightning, sudden, fierce, and transformative. For 3 months, Ethan lived a double life. By day, he was the dutiful son, learning to run board meetings and manipulate markets. By night, he was just a man in love, sitting in that diner until closing time, talking to Clara about books and dreams and all the places they'd never been. Their first kiss happened on a Tuesday in September. Behind the diner by the dumpsters where the jasmine grew wild against the brick wall. It wasn't romantic by most standards, but when their lips met under that pale moon, the universe shifted. On its axis. From that moment they were bound by something deeper than passion. They were soul-deep connected. But the Cole family, they had eyes everywhere, watching, waiting, calculating. Old Augustus Cole, Ethan's father, was a man who collected people like chess pieces and moved them according to his grand design. When word reached him that his heir was dallying with the help, he so coldly put it, the temperature in that mansion dropped 10 degrees. Augustus didn't build his empire by allowing sentiment to cloud his judgment. And he sure as hell wasn't about to let love destroy what 3 generations of Coles had built. The first warning came delivered by a man in an expensive suit who spoke in whispers. Clara found the envelope slipped under her apartment door one morning, embossed stationery. The Cole family crest pressed into the wax seal like a threat. Inside, in Augustus's spidery handwriting, some flowers are meant to bloom in shadows. Step into the light and they wither. Clara showed the letter to Ethan that night, her hands shaking like autumn leaves. But young love is foolish, and brave in equal measure. Ethan crumpled the letter, kissed her fears away, and promised nothing would ever part them. How could they know that promises, no matter how sincere, are fragile things in the face of a man like Augustus Cole? For 2 more months they tried to outrun the storm clouds gathering above them. Ethan would slip away from family dinners and board meetings, racing across town to that little apartment Clara shared with her ailing grandmother. They'd sit on her fire escape, sharing Chinese takeout and planning a future that seemed as solid as morning mist. But shadows were moving in the depths of the Cole empire. Phone calls were made, debts were called in, thought on and slowly, methodically. Augustus began to tighten the noose around Clara's life. First, her grandmother's medical insurance was mysteriously canceled. Then the diner where Clara worked received a visit from health inspectors who found violations that had never existed before. Clara's college scholarship, the one that was going to lift her out of poverty and into a teaching career, was revoked due to administrative irregularities. Each blow was precisely calculated, designed to show Clara exactly how far the Cole reach extended. One October evening, as the leaves turned the color of blood and fire, Clara received a phone call that changed everything. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as winter steel, spoke words that would haunt her dreams. Miss Evans, your grandmother's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. Expensive procedure. Experimental treatment. Shame if something were to go wrong due to inadequate funding. Perhaps we should meet. That meeting took place in a black sedan parked outside Clara's building. Augustus Cole himself sat in the shadows of the back seat, his pale eyes glittering like chips of ice. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. You will disappear from my son's life, he told her. his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Tonight completely, no goodbye, no explanation. If you refuse, if you breathe a word of this conversation to anyone, your grandmother dies on that operating table tomorrow. Not from complications, from a pillow pressed over her face while she sleeps. Clara's world tilted on its axis. Here was a man who spoke of murder as casually as others discussed the weather, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that he meant every word. But there was more. There was so much more. Augustus reached into his coat and withdrew a manila envelope. Inside were photographs Clara and Ethan together, but doctored with such skill that they told a different story. Pictures that showed Clara accepting envelopes of cash, climbing into expensive cars with older men, embracing strangers in hotel doorways. A carefully constructed narrative of a gold-digging whore who had been playing the naive billionaire for a fool. Insurance policy, Augustus explained, his thin lips curving in what might charitably be called a smile. Should you ever consider reaching out to my son in the future? These will find their way to every newspaper in the city. Your reputation, such as it is, will be destroyed. And Ethan, he'll believe every pixel of it. But the cruelest cut was yet to come. From a second envelope, Augustus withdrew a small black box. Inside, nestled in white silk, was an engagement ring, the very ring Ethan had been planning to present to her the following weekend. Augustus had stolen even that moment from them. They'll recover, the old man said, snapping the box shut. Young men always do. But you, my dear, you'll remember this choice for the rest of your life. Asterisk that night. As rain lashed against the windows like tears from a broken sky, Clara Evans began the hardest performance of her life. She sat across from Ethan in their favorite booth at Murphy's Diner, the weight of Augustus's threats pressing down on her like a stone upon her chest. It's over, she told him, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. Her voice was steady, but her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces behind her ribs. Ethan's face went pale as moonlight, his coffee growing cold between his hands. What do you mean over? He whispered, reaching across the table for her hand. But Clara pulled away as if his touch burned her, and the hurt that flashed across. His features nearly broke her resolve. This was never real, Ethan, she continued, each lie cutting her deeper than any blade. You're sweet, and you're rich, and for a while, that was enough. But I want more than hiding in shadows, sneaking around like criminals. I want someone who can give me everything, not someone who has to ask Daddy's permission. The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Ethan's hand fell to the table, his fingers trembling slightly. You don't mean that, he said, but his voice carried the weight of dawning understanding. Clara, whatever this is about, we can work through it. I love you, and that was. The moment Clara's heart truly died, because she loved him too with every fiber of her being, and that love was exactly why she had to destroy it. Love? She laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in an empty room. Ethan, I'm 22 years old, not ready to settle down with the first boy who buys me dinner. I want to see the world, experience life. I can't do that tied down to someone who... ... single quotes. She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. Someone who what? His voice was barely a whisper now. Someone who isn't enough, she finished, driving the final nail into the coffin of their love. Ethan sat in stunned silence for a long moment, rain streaking down the window beside them like tears. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, defeated. Is there someone else? Clara met his eyes one last time, memorizing the way they looked at her with such wounded confusion. There's always someone else, Ethan. That's the point. She stood then, leaving him sitting alone in that booth with the ruins of their dreams scattered around him like fallen leaves. She walked out into the rain without looking back, though. Every step felt like walking through molten glass. What Ethan couldn't know, what Clara would never tell him, was that she was already carrying his child. Had been for 6 weeks, though she'd only discovered it herself the day before Augustus's ultimatum. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. And Clara understood with crystal clarity that the old man had known about her condition before she did. That night, she packed her few belongings and vanished from Boston like smoke on the wind. By morning, it was as if Clara Evans had never existed at all. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But some wounds fester in the darkness, growing deeper and more poisonous with each passing season. For 7 years, Clara Evans lived like a ghost, drifting from city to city with her twin children and James, born with their father's dark eyes and stubborn chin. She worked every job you can imagine, and several you probably can't. Waitress, house cleaner, night shift factory worker, daycare assistant, always paid in cash, always using different names, always one step ahead of the black sedans that sometimes appeared in her rearview mirror. Augustus Cole was a man who believed in insurance policies, and Clara knew that somewhere in his files, her photograph was marked unfinished business. The twins grew up thinking their father was dead, killed in a car accident before they were born. It was easier than explaining the truth that their father was alive and powerful and forbidden to know they existed. Emma became Clara's little warrior, fierce and protective beyond her years. James was the dreamer, gentle soul who built castles out of cardboard and believed in happy endings, despite living in shelters and one-room apartments. But winter has a way of stripping away all illusions, doesn't it? That December in Chicago, when the wind cut through their thin coats like knives in Clara's last job, ended with a layoff notice. She found herself staring at a decision that would change everything. The shelter was full. Her car had died 3 blocks away, exhaust pipe cracked and leaking poison into the cabin. She had $17 in her wallet and 2 children whose lips were turning blue from the cold. Desperation is a funny thing. It makes cowards brave and proud people humble. So Clara did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She opened her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found names from her old life in Boston. Most of the numbers were probably dead by now. But maybe, just maybe, someone would remember the girl who used to pour coffee and dream of better days. She typed out the message with numb fingers. "This is Clara Evans. I know it's been years, but I'm in trouble. My children and I need shelter for the night. It's just until morning, please." She sent it to 12 people from her past. 11 of them never responded, but the 12th was a number she'd never deleted, though she'd stared at it 1,000 times over the years. The contact was simply labeled E, because even writing his full name felt like opening an old wound. The response came back within minutes. "Where are you?" Suddenly Clara Evans was 19 again, sitting in a diner booth and falling in love with a boy who promised to protect her from the world. Ethan Cole had built his empire on the bones of his father's legacy, but he'd built it differently. Where Augustus had ruled through fear and manipulation, Ethan governed through strategy and calculated risk. He'd learned the old man's lessons. Well, perhaps too well, but he'd never forgotten the boy he'd been before. Clara broke his heart. For 7 years, he'd searched for her. Private investigators, police contacts, even FBI friends who owed him favors. Every lead went nowhere. Every trail went cold. It was as if Clara Evans had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only the ghost of her memory to haunt his sleepless nights. He'd built Cole Industries into something. Augustus could never have imagined a company that dealt in technology and innovation rather than just brutal acquisition. But success tasted like ash in his mouth because the one person he'd wanted to share it with had vanished without a trace. That December night, he was in his office on the 42nd floor, reviewing acquisition reports and trying to ignore the bottle of scotch that seemed to be calling his name from the cabinet. His phone buzzed with a message notification, and he almost ignored it. But something about the timestamp sent to his personal number rather than his business line made him glance at the screen. The message was from a blocked number, but the words hit him like a physical blow. "This is Clara Evans. I know it's been years, but I'm in trouble. My children and I need shelter for the night, just until morning. Please, children. Plural." Clara had children. Ethan stared at the message until the words blurred together, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. For a moment, he wondered if this was some kind of elaborate hoax, a cruel joke from someone who knew about his past. Not. The phrasing, the cadence of the words. It was unmistakably her voice. His fingers moved before his brain could catch up. "Where are you?" The address she sent back was for a park on Chicago's South Side, a place where honest people didn't go after dark. Ethan was moving before he'd finished reading, grabbing his coat and keys, and heading for the private elevator that led to the parking garage. The drive from his penthouse to the airfield took 12 minutes. The flight from Boston to Chicago took 2 hours. But those 2 hours felt like an eternity, filled with questions that had no answers and memories that had never properly healed. What would he say to her? What could he say? The last words between them had been poison, designed to hurt and maim, and now she was asking for his help, after 7 years of silence. With children whose father was presumably some other man who'd managed to give her what Ethan never could. The jealousy that thought brought was sharp enough to cut glass. His driver met him at the Chicago airport, and they navigated through the city's winter-dark streets toward the address Clara had provided. As they got closer to the park, Ethan's chest grew tighter with each passing block. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people came voluntarily. This was where people ended up when they'd run out of better options. And then he saw her. She was sitting on a bench under a flickering streetlight, her arms wrapped around two small figures huddled against her sides. Even from a distance, even after 7 years, even in the harsh orange glow of the sodium lights, Ethan would have recognized Clara Evans anywhere. But it was the children that made his breath catch in his throat. Because when the little boy lifted his head to look at the approaching car, Ethan was staring into his own eyes, the same dark brown, the same shape, the same stubborn set to, the jawline that he'd inherited from his mother. The little girl looked up a moment later, and Ethan's world tilted completely off its axis. She had Clara's delicate features, but his coloring, his expression of wary intelligence. There was no question, no room for doubt. Clara Evans had been carrying his children when she walked out of his life, and for 7 years she'd been raising them alone. The car came to a stop 20 feet from the bench, but Ethan couldn't move. He sat frozen in the back seat, staring at the family he'd never known he had. Trying to reconcile the woman on the bench with the girl who'd broken his heart in a diner booth? Clara had spotted the car too. She'd gone very still, like a deer scenting a predator, and Ethan could see her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a curse. The children were looking between their mother and the idling car with the kind of wariness that spoke to a lifetime of running from things they couldn't understand. Finally, Ethan forced himself to move. He stepped out of the car into the bitter Chicago wind, and for a moment that stretched like eternity. He and Clara simply stared at each other across the distance of 7 years and 1,000 unanswered questions. Then the little girl, his daughter, spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mama, is that the man who's going to help us?" And Clara Evans, the woman who had once been his entire world, nodded slowly and said, "Yes, baby. That's exactly who he is." Asterisk. There are moments in a man's life that change everything, moments that divide existence into before and after with the precision of a surgeon's blade. For Ethan Cole, that moment was walking across 20 feet of snow-covered pavement too. Meet children who shared his blood but didn't know his name. The little boy James, Clara would tell him later, clung to his mother's coat with mittened hands. But his dark eyes tracked Ethan's every movement with the kind of intense focus that reminded Ethan painfully of himself at that age. The girl Emma was braver, or perhaps more desperate. She stood up as Ethan approached, all 4 feet of her radiating fierce protectiveness. "Are you really going to help us?" she asked, her voice carrying an authority that would have been comical if it weren't so heartbreaking. "Because Mama's been crying, and James is coughing, and we don't have anywhere warm to sleep tonight." Ethan knelt down to her eye level, his expensive coat soaking up slush from the sidewalk. "Yes," he said, and his voice only shook slightly. "I'm going to help you, all of you." Emma studied his face with the kind of shrewd assessment that would serve her well in boardrooms someday. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once decisively. "Okay then. But James gets to sit by the window in the car because he likes to watch the lights go by." It was such a small thing, such an ordinary sibling negotiation, but it hit Ethan with the force of revelation. These children had been making do, making the best of whatever scraps life threw them, probably for as long as they could remember, and he'd had no idea they existed. Clara finally spoke, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "Ethan, I not." "Here," he said, cutting her off gently. "Not like this. Let's get them warm first." The ride to the hotel was silent, except for James's soft cough and Emma's running commentary on the city lights. Clara sat in the front seat, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white, and Ethan caught her reflection in the window hollow cheeks. Dark circles under her eyes, the kind of bone-deep weariness that spoke to years of struggling just to survive. The hotel was one of those places that catered to business travelers and rich tourists. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The concierge took one look at Clara and the children in their worn coats and second-hand boots, and his expression shifted to the kind of polite disdain that rich people never notice but poor people feel like a slap. "I need the presidential suite," Ethan told him, sliding his black credit card across the marble counter. Immediately, the transformation was instantaneous. The concierge's sneer melted into obsequious courtesy, and suddenly there were bellhops, appearing out of nowhere to escort them to the elevator. Ethan had seen this dance 1,000 times before, but watching Emma's wide eyes take in the sudden change in their treatment made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. The suite was larger than most people's apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city's glittering skyline. James ran straight to the glass, pressing his small hands against the cold surface and breathing fog patterns that he traced with his finger. Emma was more cautious, staying close to her mother, but clearly amazed by the luxury surrounding them. "There's a kitchen," Clara said softly, and Ethan heard the wonder in her voice. "We could make them real food." It was such a simple statement, but it painted a picture of their life that made Ethan's throat close up. When was the last time his children had eaten a home-cooked meal? When was the last time they'd slept in a real bed, or taken a hot bath, or done any of the thousand small things that he'd taken for granted his entire life? "There are clothes and their size in the bedroom," he lied smoothly. "Room service can bring up whatever you need." He was already texting his assistant, firing off instructions that would see the hotel's boutique opened after hours and stylists sent up with everything a mother and 2 children might need. Money couldn't fix the past 7 years, but it could at least make sure they were comfortable while they figured out what came next. Clara was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Ethan looked at James, still tracing patterns on the window, then at Emma, who was cautiously exploring the suite's amenities with the careful thoroughness of someone who'd learned not to trust good things to last. "Because they're mine," he said simply. "Aren't they?" Clara's composure cracked then, just for a moment. Her hand went to her mouth, and he could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. But she pulled herself together with visible effort, the same way she'd probably been pulling herself together for 7 long years. "Yes," she whispered. "They're yours. Asterisk." The children fell asleep quickly after hot baths and room service pancakes that James declared better than birthday cake. Emma had been skeptical of the luxury at first, but exhaustion won out over caution, and soon both twins were curled up in the suite's king-sized bed like small angels in a fairy tale. Clara and Ethan sat in the living area, the silence between them heavy with 7 years of unspoken words. She'd changed into clothes the hotel staff had procured simple jeans and a sweater that actually fit her properly, and for a moment Ethan could see the girl she'd been before life had worn her down to the bone. "I need to know why," he said. Finally, his voice careful and controlled. "Why you left. Why you never told me about them. Why you've been living like this." Clara was quiet for so long that Ethan wondered if she'd fallen asleep with her eyes open. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your father came to see me." Those 5 words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Augustus Cole had been dead for 3 years, but his shadow still fell across everything Ethan touched. What did he do? And so Clara told him everything. The threats, the photographs, the ultimatum that had torn her world apart. She spoke in flat, emotionless tones, like she was reciting someone else's story. But Ethan could see the way her hands trembled as she talked. "He said you'd believe the pictures," she finished. "You'd think I was just another gold digger who'd been playing you for a fool, and maybe part of me was afraid he was right." Ethan felt rage building in his chest like a living thing. hot and consuming and decades too late. You should have told me. Could have faced him together. With what? Clara's composure cracked, and suddenly the pain she'd been carrying erupted like a dam bursting. You were 23 years old, Ethan. You had no money of your own. No power, no influence that wasn't tied to his name. He would have destroyed us both and enjoyed every minute of it. She was right, and they both knew it. The young man Ethan had been back then was no match for Augustus Cole's decades of ruthless manipulation. But that didn't make the truth any easier to swallow. I looked for you, he said. For years I looked for you. I know. Clara's voice was soft now, tired. I saw the investigators sometimes. That's why we kept moving. I couldn't take the chance that they'd find us, that he'd. She gestured toward the bedroom where their children slept. He made it very clear what would happen if I ever came back into your life. He's dead, Clara. He died 3 years ago. I know that too, she said. I read about it in the papers. But by then it felt too late. What was I supposed to do? Show up on your doorstep with 2 kids and say, "Surprise, remember me? The girl who broke your heart?" Well, funny story, ... Ethan leaned forward in his chair, studying her face in the lamplight. She was still beautiful, would always be beautiful, but there were lines around her eyes that spoke to sleepless nights and endless worry. There was a wariness in her posture that suggested she was ready to run at the first sign of danger. She'd been a fighter all these years, protecting their children from a world that had shown her very little kindness. So why now? He asked. Why reach out tonight? Clara's laugh was hollow, brittle, because I was out of options. My car died. The shelter was full, and it was 20 degrees below zero. I would have called anyone at that point, anyone who might remember me and care. Enough to help. You just happened to be the only one who answered. It should have stung, being relegated to last resort status. But Ethan found he was grateful just to be on the list at all. 7 years ago, Clara Evans had walked out of his life and taken his heart with her. Tonight, she'd walked back into it, carrying 2 children who shared his eyes and his stubborn chin, and suddenly, nothing else mattered. What happens now? She asked, and he could hear the fear in her voice. I know this. It's complicated. I know you probably have a life, maybe a family of your own. ... No family, Ethan said quickly. There's never been anyone else. Clara, not really. She looked at him with something that might have been surprise or relief or simple exhaustion. 7 years is a long time to wait for someone who left you the way I did. I wasn't waiting, he admitted. I was just ... existing. Building the company. Making money. Going through the motions. But I never stopped loving you. Even when I hated you. I never stopped loving you. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. Outside the hotel windows, Chicago glittered in the darkness, oblivious to the quiet revolution, taking place 42 floors above the street. Ethan, Clara said softly, I need you to understand something. I can't go back to being that girl who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Too much has happened. I've had to be strong for them, had to make hard choices, had to do things I'm not proud of just to keep us alive. I'm not. I'm not the same person you fell in love with. Ethan stood up and crossed to the window, looking out at the city, where his children had been growing up without him. Good, he said finally, because I'm not the same person either. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we're both exactly who we need to be now. The flight back to Boston was a revelation for everyone involved. James pressed his face to the airplane window, marveling at the clouds spread out below them like a cotton field, while Emma interrogated the flight attendant about everything, from altitude to air pressure, with the relentless curiosity of a future scientist. Clara sat between her children and Ethan, still processing the surreal turn her life had taken in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been a desperate single mother with nowhere to turn. Today, she was flying first class to Boston, with the man who'd never stopped loving her, and the children who'd never known they had a father. Tell me about them, Ethan said quietly. His voice pitched low enough that the twins couldn't hear over their excited chatter about the clouds. What are they like? What do they love? What scares them? Clara's expression softened as she watched her children. "Emma's the protector," she said. "She's been looking out for James and me since she could walk. She's scary smart, reads at a high school level already, asks questions that make my head spin. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up, or maybe a scientist.
Ow.
She says she wants to fix things that are broken. And James? James is the dreamer. He sees magic everywhere in rainbows and stranger smiles, in the way light moves across water. He builds these elaborate stories about everything around him. The homeless man on the corner becomes a displaced king. The stray cat becomes a familiar scent by benevolent witches. He makes the world beautiful just by seeing it differently. Ethan watched his son trace patterns on the airplane window, lost in some story only he could see. "He gets that from you," he said. "The dreaming? No, that's all his own." "The ability to find beauty in impossible places," Ethan corrected. "That's definitely from you." Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching Boston grow larger through the windows as they began their descent. "What if this doesn't work?" she asked suddenly. "What if we get there and realize we're all different people now? What if the children don't adjust? What if, Clara?" Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "We'll figure it out. All of it. Together." The word "together" hung between them like a promise. Neither of them was quite ready to examine too closely. But it felt solid, dependable. The foundation of something that might, with time and patience, grow into the family they'd never had the chance to build. Boston Logan Airport was a maze of noise and movement, but Ethan's security team had everything coordinated with military precision. A private car waited just outside the terminal. Within minutes, they were navigating through the familiar streets of Ethan's childhood city. "It's so big," Emma breathed, staring up at the skyscrapers that rose around them like glass and steel mountains. "Wait until you see the harbor," Ethan promised. "In Fenway Park. In the Science Museum." "Science Museum." Emma perked up immediately. "What kind of science?" "Every kind. They have a butterfly garden and a room where you can make lightning. And dinosaur bones so big you could walk underneath them." James turned from the window, eyes wide. "Real dinosaurs? Real dinosaur bones?" Ethan clarified. "The dinosaurs themselves have been gone for a very long time. That's sad," James said with the gravity of a child who felt things deeply. "You think they were lonely when they died?" The question caught Ethan off guard with its unexpected depth. "I think they had each other," he said finally. "Families, just like we do, so probably they weren't lonely." James nodded, satisfied with this answer, and returned to watching the city roll by outside. But Clara caught Ethan's eye and mouthed thank you recognition of how carefully he'd just handled his son's tender heart. The Cole family mansion sat on 10 acres in Brookline, a sprawling estate that had been in the family for 3 generations. As their car pulled through the iron gates, Clara felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. The last time she'd been on Cole property, Augustus had made it very clear that she wasn't welcome. Even though the old man was dead, his ghost seemed to linger in every perfectly manicured hedge and imposing stone column. "It's like a castle," Emma whispered, and for once her confidence seemed shaken by the sheer scale of wealth on display. "It's just a house," Ethan said, but he was watching Clara's face. Seeing the way her hands had clenched in her lap, a big, empty house that needs a family to make it feel like home. The car stopped in front of the main entrance, where Ethan's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was waiting with a smile that lit up her entire face. She'd been with the family for 30 years, had watched Ethan grow from a boy into a man, and had heard every story about the girl who'd broken his heart. But when she saw Clara climbing out of the car, followed by 2 children who looked exactly like young Ethan, her professional composure cracked completely. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. "Mr. Ethan, are these... ... "Mrs. Chen, I'd like you to meet my family," Ethan said, his voice carrying a weight of meaning that made the older woman's eyes fill with tears. "This is Clara, Emma, and James." Mrs. Chen had been part of the household during the dark years after Clara's departure. She'd watched Ethan retreat into work and solitude, had seen him build walls around his heart that she'd feared would never come down. Now seeing him with his hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder, while his daughter studied the house with analytical eyes, she understood that miracles really did happen sometimes. "Welcome home," she said simply, and meant every word. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of adjustment and discovery. Emma claimed the library as her domain within hours, pulling books off shelves with the focused determination of someone who'd been rationing reading material for years. James found the conservatory where Augustus had once grown prize-winning orchids, and immediately began constructing elaborate adventures among the plants. Clara moved through the house like she was walking through a museum, touching nothing, disrupting nothing, trying to make herself as small as possible. Old habits die hard, and 7 years of instability had taught her not to get comfortable anywhere. But Ethan was patient. He knew that trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Not with Clara, not with the children, not even with himself. So he took things slowly, letting them set the pace, letting them discover that this wasn't temporary, wasn't conditional on good behavior or gratitude. On the third morning, while the children were having breakfast with Mrs. Chen, Clara finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Where is he buried? Ethan looked up from his coffee, understanding immediately who she meant. Mount Auburn Cemetery, Section 17, Plot 42. Very dignified, very traditional. Everything he would have wanted. "I need to see it," Clara said quietly. I need to know he's really gone." The cemetery was beautiful in the way that only old Boston cemeteries could be, rolling hills, dotted with weathered headstones and ancient trees that had witnessed more than a century of grief and remembrance. Augustus Cole's grave was marked with a simple black granite headstone that bore only his name and dates, no flowery epitaphs or biblical verses. Clara stood before it for a long time, her hands clenched at her sides, while Ethan waited a respectful distance away. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You bastard," she said to the stone. "You cruel, vindictive bastard. Do you know what you cost us? Do you know what you put those children through because of your pride and your need to control everything?" Her voice was rising now, 7 years of suppressed rage finally finding its outlet. They lived in shelters because of you. They went to bed hungry because of you. Emma learned to read by candlelight in a homeless camp because you couldn't stand the thought of your precious son loving someone beneath his station. Ethan moved closer, ready to comfort her if she needed it, but Clara wasn't finished. "You lost," she continued, her voice steady now, despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "You lost because love doesn't die just because you want it to. It doesn't disappear because you threaten it, or manipulate it, or try to crush it under the weight of your money and power. Love endures. Love finds a way. And your grandchildren are going to grow up knowing they're loved, really loved." Despite everything you tried to do to prevent it, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something smaller photograph, creased, and worn from years of handling. It was a picture of the twins from their last birthday, both of them laughing as they shared a cupcake from a convenience store. She placed it on the headstone and stepped back. "That's what you missed," she said simply. "That's what your hatred cost you," as they walked back to the car. Clara seemed lighter somehow, as if confronting Augustus's ghost had finally allowed her to lay down a burden she'd been carrying for too long. "Thank you," she said to Ethan. "I needed that." "He can't hurt you anymore," Ethan replied. "Any of you. I won't let him." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "You keep saying things like that. I won't let him. I'll protect you. I'll take care of everything. But Ethan, I've been taking care of myself and the children for 7 years. I don't need rescuing. I don't need someone to fix my life. I need... ... single quotes, searching for the right words. "What do you need?" he asked gently. "I need a partner," she said finally. "Someone who sees me as strong enough to stand beside, not fragile enough to need saving. I need someone who understands that what we've been through has made us stronger, not broken. Can you be that person?" It was a fair question, and Ethan took a moment to really consider it. His first instinct had been to wrap Clara and the children in cotton wool, to shield them from every possible hardship. to use his wealth and power to smooth away all the rough edges of their lives. But that wasn't what she was asking for, and it wasn't what they needed. "I can try," he said honestly. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise I won't sometimes want to fix things that don't need fixing. But I can promise to. Listen, when you tell me I'm overstepping, I can promise to respect the strength that kept our family together when I couldn't." Clara studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "That's enough," she said. "That's a start." Winter began to loosen its grip on Boston as March arrived, bringing with it the first tentative promises of spring. In the Cole mansion, changes were happening that would have made Augustus spin in his grave aunt, that made everyone else smile. Emma had convinced Ethan to convert one of the unused guest rooms into a proper laboratory, complete with microscopes and chemistry sets and safety equipment that would have made her science teachers weep with envy. She spent hours there, every day, conducting experiments with the methodical precision of a future Nobel laureate. James had claimed the music room, though he used it less for music and more as a storytelling theater. He'd drag whoever was available. Mrs. Chen, the gardener, visiting business associates who found themselves unexpectedly charmed by a 6-year-old's epic tales, to sit and listen while he acted out elaborate adventures featuring brave knights, talking animals, and magic that always triumphed over darkness. Clara had been the hardest to settle. Used to constant motion, constant vigilance, she found the mansion's peace unsettling at first. But gradually, she began to reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under years of survival. She started painting again, setting up an easel. In the sunroom, where the morning light was perfect, her canvases were full of color and movement abstracts that seemed to capture joy in the process of being born. And Ethan was learning to be a father one day at a time. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Emma's fierce independence clashed with his protective instincts, when James's emotional sensitivity left Ethan feeling helpless and unequipped. There were nights when he lay awake wondering if he was doing everything wrong, if his children would have been better off without a father who was still learning how to be human. But there were also moments of pure magic. Like the morning Emma ran into his office, eyes blazing with excitement, to tell him about the chemical reaction she'd just discovered, or the evening James crawled into his lap during a thunderstorm and asked him to make up a story about brave little boys who weren't afraid of lightning because they knew their daddies would keep them safe. "You're getting good at this," Clara observed one evening, watching Ethan help James with a puzzle while Emma worked on homework nearby. "I'm fumbling through it," Ethan admitted. "Making it up as I go along. That's what all parents do," Clara said with a smile. "The ones who claim to know what they're doing are either lying or delusional." They were sitting in the family room, a space that had been formal and untouchable during Augustus's lifetime, but was now scattered with children's books, art supplies, and the comfortable debris of daily life. It was a transformation that seemed to symbolize everything that had changed in the house since Clara and the twins arrived. "I've been thinking," Ethan said carefully, "about the future, about what comes next for all of us." Clara looked up from her sketchpad, where she'd been drawing James as he worked on his puzzle. "What kind of thinking?" "The kind where I ask if you'd consider making this permanent," Ethan said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Not just the living arrangement, but all of it. A real family, real commitment." Clara set down her pencil, her expression unreadable. "Ethan, I know we're not the same people we were 7 years ago," he continued quickly, needing to get the words out before courage failed him. "I know we can't just pick up where we left off. Can't pretend the years apart didn't happen. But we can build something new, can't we? Something stronger because of what we've survived." Clara was quiet for so long that Ethan began to wonder if he'd pushed too hard, too fast. But when she finally spoke, her voice was soft with wonder. "You asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to let me love you and the children the way I should have been doing all along. I'm asking for a chance to be the man you deserve, the father they deserve. And if that includes marriage, then yes, I'm asking you to marry me." Emma looked up from her homework, her sharp ears having caught the word marriage. "Are you and Mama getting married?" she asked with typical directness. James abandoned his puzzle entirely, climbing onto the couch between his parents. "What's married mean exactly?" he asked. Clara looked at Ethan, her eyes bright with unshed tears, then gathered both children. Close. Married means promising to take care of each other forever, she explained. Means being a family officially and legally, and in every way that matters. Like how we are now, but with a party. Emma asked. Something like that? Clara laughed. James considered this information seriously. Will there be cake? He asked. The biggest cake you've ever seen, Ethan promised. Then I vote yes, James declared with 6-year-old authority. Was more analytical, as always. Will this mean we get to stay in the big house forever and keep the lab and never have to sleep in the car again? Forever and always, Ethan confirmed. No more running, no more hiding, no more sleeping in cars or shelters. This is home now. Emma nodded approvingly. And I vote yes, too. All eyes turned to Clara, who was looking at her little family with an expression of wonder and gratitude, and love so profound it seemed to light her up from within. Then it's unanimous, she said softly, and kissed Ethan like she was sealing a pact with the universe itself. They were married on a perfect June morning in the mansion's garden, surrounded by friends who had never stopped believing in love's power to heal, and by children, who served as both flower girl and ring bearer with solemn pride. Clara wore a simple white dress that caught the sunlight like joy made manifest. And Ethan wore a smile that Mrs. Chen declared was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Emma had insisted on adding a science blessing to the ceremony, explaining to the bemused minister that love was a chemical reaction that created bonds stronger than anything found in nature. James contributed a story about two kingdoms that had been separated by a cruel wizard but were reunited by the power of true love and magic pancakes. The reception was held under a tent in the garden, with tables that groaned under the weight of Mrs. Chun's cooking and a dance floor where Emma proved she'd inherited her mother's grace, while James demonstrated that enthusiasm counted for more than technique. As the sun set over Boston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan and Clara stood at the edge of their celebration, watching their children chase fireflies across the lawn. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd fought harder 7 years ago? Clara asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. But then I look at who we are now, who they are now, and I think maybe everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. Maybe we needed those 7 years to become the people we needed to be for each other. Clara lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft in the twilight. You really believe that? I believe that love doesn't follow a timeline, Ethan said. I believe that some things are worth waiting for, even when you don't know you're waiting. I believe that our children are perfect exactly as they are. And they wouldn't be these amazing people if their lives had been different, even with all the hardship. All the struggle? Especially because of it, Ethan said firmly. Emma's strength comes from protecting you and James when she was barely more than a baby herself. James's compassion comes from seeing suffering and choosing kindness anyway. Your resilience comes from facing impossible choices and somehow always choosing love. None of that would exist if we'd had an easy path. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Emma explain some complex scientific principle to a fascinated business associate while James entertained a group of adults with an impromptu puppet show, using dinner napkins. They're going to be extraordinary, she said finally. They already are, Ethan replied. They're yours, as if summoned by their parents' conversation. Both children came running across the lawn, their formal wedding, clothes rumpled and grass-stained from their adventures. Mama, Daddy, Emma called, using the title that still made Ethan's chest tighten with emotion every time he heard it. Mrs. Chen says there's leftover cake we can have for breakfast tomorrow. Is that true? James asked hopefully. Cake? For breakfast? Ethan looked at Clara, who shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of a mother who'd learned to pick her battles. It's our wedding day, she said. I think we can make an exception. The children cheered and ran off to inform Mrs. Chen of this miraculous development, leaving Ethan and Clara alone under the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. What happens now? Clara asked. Now that we're officially the Cole family? Ethan pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair and the lingering traces of wedding flowers. Now we live, he said simply. We raise our children. We love each other. We build something beautiful together. That sounds perfect. Clara murmured against his chest. And it was perfect, in the way that real life is perfect, messy and complicated and full of small moments that add up to something magnificent. It wasn't the fairy tale ending they'd once dreamed of as young lovers, but it was something better. It was real. They were married on a perfect June morning in the mansion's garden, surrounded by friends who had never stopped believing in love's power to heal and buy children, who served as both flower girl and ring bearer with solemn pride. Clara wore a simple white dress that caught the sunlight like joy made manifest. And Ethan wore a smile that Mrs. Chen declared was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Emma had insisted on adding a science blessing to the ceremony, explaining to the bemused minister that love was a chemical reaction that created bonds stronger than anything found in nature.
Ow.
James contributed a story about two kingdoms that had been separated by a cruel wizard, but were reunited by the power of true love and magic pancakes. The reception was held under a tent in the garden, with tables that groaned under the weight of Mrs. Chen's cooking and a dance floor where Emma proved she'd inherited her mother's grace, while James demonstrated that enthusiasm counted for more than technique. As the sun set over Boston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan and Clara stood at the edge of their celebration, watching their children chase fireflies across the lawn. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd fought harder 7 years ago? Clara asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. Sometimes, Ethan admitted, but then I look at who we are now, who they are, and I think maybe everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. Maybe we needed those 7 years to become the people we needed to be for each other. Clara lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft in the twilight. You really believe that? I believe that love doesn't follow a timeline, Ethan said. I believe that some things are worth waiting for, even when you don't know you're waiting. I believe that our children are perfect exactly as they are, and they wouldn't be these amazing people if their lives had been different. Even with all the hardship, all the struggle, especially because of it, Ethan said firmly. Emma's strength comes from protecting you and James when she was barely more than a baby herself. James's compassion comes from seeing suffering and choosing kindness anyway. Your resilience comes from facing impossible choices and somehow always choosing love. None of that would exist if we'd had an easy path. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Emma explain some complex scientific principle to a fascinated business associate while James entertained a group of adults with an impromptu puppet show. Using dinner napkins? They're going to be extraordinary, she said finally. They already are, Ethan replied. They're yours, as if summoned by their parents' conversation. Both children came running across the lawn, their formal wedding clothes rumpled and grass-stained from their adventures. Mama, Daddy, Emma called, using the title that still made Ethan's chest tighten with emotion every time he heard it. Mrs. Chen says there's leftover cake we can have for breakfast tomorrow. Is that true? James asked hopefully. Cake? For breakfast? Ethan looked at Clara, who shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of a mother who'd learned to pick her battles. It's our wedding day, she said. I think we can make an exception. The children cheered and ran off to inform Mrs. Chen of this miraculous development, leaving Ethan and Clara alone under the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. So what happens now? Clara asked. Now that we're officially the Cole family? Ethan pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair and the lingering traces of wedding flowers. Now we live, he said simply. We raise our children, we love each other, we build something beautiful together. That sounds perfect, Clara murmured against his chest. And it was perfect, in the way that real life is perfect, messy and complicated and full of small moments that add up to something magnificent. It wasn't the fairy tale ending they'd once dreamed of as young lovers, but it was something better. It was real. And so, my dear listeners, we come to the end of our tale, though perhaps end is the wrong word for a love story that continues to unfold with each passing day. Let me tell you about a spring morning, 5 years after that wedding in the garden, when the Cole family had fully come into its own. Emma, now 11, had won the state science fair with a project on renewable energy that impressed judges from MIT. She wore her medal to breakfast every morning for a week, not out of vanity, but out of the simple joy of achievement recognized. She'd already announced her intention to pursue dual degrees in chemistry and medicine, with the goal of fixing everything that's broken in the world, as she put it with characteristic determination. James, equally 11, but different as night from day, had discovered a talent for music that rivaled his storytelling abilities. The piano in the music room, silent for so many years now, filled the house with melodies that seemed to capture emotions too complex for words. His compositions had a haunting beauty that spoke to experiences far beyond his years, as if his gentle soul remembered every moment of struggle and transformed them into something transcendent. Clara had opened a small art studio in downtown Boston, where she taught painting to children from backgrounds similar to her own. Her canvases now hung in galleries across the city, abstract expressions of triumph over adversity that spoke to anyone who'd ever had to fight for their dreams. But her greatest masterpiece remained the family she'd protected and nurtured through 7 years in the wilderness, and Ethan. Ethan had learned that the greatest fortune a man can acquire isn't measured in dollars or assets, but in the trust of children who call you daddy, and the love of a woman who chose to build a life with you despite every reason to run away. He'd restructured coal industries to focus on sustainable technology and humanitarian projects, turning his family's legacy of acquisition into one of restoration. The Coal Foundation, named for his children, provided scholarships and support. 2 single mothers and their children, ensuring that no family would face the struggles Clara had faced alone. On that particular spring morning, as I watched from the garden bench where this story began so many years ago, I saw Emma teaching her father about photosynthesis using the roses that bloomed where Augustus's prized orchids once grew. I saw James composing a song about the way morning light danced on the harbor. I saw Clara and Ethan stealing a kiss while their children were distracted, still surprised by their own happiness after all this time. And I thought about the mysterious ways that love works in this world, how it can be buried but not destroyed, how it can endure separation and betrayal and still bloom again when conditions are right, how sometimes the longest path between 2 hearts is also the most necessary one. You see, child, this was never really a story about a billionaire and his lost love, though that's how it began. This was a story about the kind of love that transforms people, not the easy, comfortable love of fairy tales, but the hard-won love that survives testing and emerges stronger for the struggle. It was a story about a woman who chose her children over her own comfort every day for 7 years without ever knowing if her sacrifice would be worth it. About a man who learned that true wealth isn't inherited, but earned through the daily choice to put family above fortune. About children who grew up understanding that love isn't guaranteed, but must be fought for, protected, and cherished. Perhaps most importantly, it was a story about redemption, how past mistakes don't have to define future happiness, how broken families can be healed, and how sometimes the very experiences that nearly destroy us are the ones that prepare us for our greatest joy. But let me tell you about one final moment, the moment that happened just last month. As winter began its retreat from Boston once again, Emma had come home from school with questions about her science project, something about inherited traits and genetic memory. She'd been studying photographs of herself and James's babies, comparing them to pictures of Ethan at the same age. "Mama," she said, settling into Clara's lap with the easy affection of a child who'd never doubted her place in the world, "do you think we remember things from before we were born? Like, could James and I somehow remember Daddy, even though we didn't meet him until we were 6? Clara looked across the room at Ethan, who was helping James with his homework, and something passed between them, one of those wordless communications that longtime lovers develop, full of shared memory and understanding. "What makes you?" "Ask that, sweetheart," Clara replied. "Because sometimes, when Daddy reads to us, or when he laughs at James's jokes, it feels familiar, like I've heard it before, even though I know I haven't. And James said he feels the same way, like Daddy's voice was always supposed to be part of our bedtime stories." Emma paused, her scientific mind wrestling with concepts that couldn't be measured or quantified. "Maybe love leaves an imprint," she continued thoughtfully. "Maybe when someone loves you that much, even from far away, part of you knows it. Part of you remembers." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, because out of the mouths of children often comes the deepest truth. "I think you might be right about that," she said softly. I think love has its own kind of memory. From across the room, Ethan's voice joined the conversation. I know you're right about that, because every day for 7 years, I looked for faces like yours in crowds. Every time I heard children laughing, I wondered if somewhere you were laughing too. Love doesn't forget even when everything else does. James looked up from his homework, his gentle eyes bright with understanding. So we were never really alone, he said. Even when it was just Mama and us, Daddy was still loving us. Just couldn't see it yet? That's exactly right, son, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Love doesn't need to be in the same room to be real. It doesn't need to be spoken out loud to be true. Sometimes the strongest love is the kind that waits and hopes and never gives up believing. Emma nodded seriously. Filing this information away with all the other important facts she collected about the world. In my project, she announced, love as a genetic trait. Love as inherited memory. Love is the thing that connects people across time and distance. And as I watched this family, this miracle of second chances, in stubborn hope I thought about all the other stories playing out in this vast, complicated world. Stories of love lost and found, of families broken and rebuilt, of people who refuse to let circumstances define their capacity for joy. Because that's what this story has always been about, hasn't it? Not the money or the mansion or even the dramatic reunification. It's been about the quiet heroism of a woman who chose love over comfort day after day, year after year. About the faith of a man who believed in a love he couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't prove existed. About children who grew up knowing that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice and commitment and the decision to keep choosing each other no matter what. The snow that brought them together that December night has melted and frozen and melted again many times over. The bench where Clara sat with her children, desperate and afraid, now bears a small bronze plaque that reads, Sometimes the longest journey home begins with a single message sent into the darkness. It was Emma's idea, way of honoring the moment that changed everything. And every winter, when the first snow falls on Boston, the Cole family makes a pilgrimage to that park. They bring hot chocolate and thermos bottles and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and they sit on that same bench no longer 3 desperate souls, but 5 people who understand that love is both fragile and indestructible. That it can be tested, but not broken. That it grows stronger in the spaces between separation and reunion. They talk about the years they lost and the years they've gained. They make plans for the future and peace with the past. And as the snow falls around them like blessing made visible, they remember that some love stories don't follow the rules, they write their own. So, ends our tale, dear listeners. Not with a happily ever after, because real love doesn't work that way, but with a happily ever after all. All the struggles, all the separations, all the moments when hope seemed impossible, and love seemed lost forever. They loved each other anyway. They chose each other anyway. They built a family anyway. And in the end, that's the only magic that matters. The decision to believe in love, even when it doesn't make sense. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when the whole world conspires to keep you apart. Because love, real love, doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for perfect timing. It simply endures like snow in winter, like spring after the longest darkness, like hope after the cruelest disappointment. It endures, and it transforms everything it touches, and it makes ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. Just like Clara Evans, who loved her children enough to sacrifice everything. Just like Ethan Cole, who never stopped believing. In a woman who seemed lost forever. Just like Emma and James, who taught their parents that family isn't something you're born into, it, something you create, one choice at a time. And if you listen carefully on quiet winter nights, when the snow falls soft and steady over Boston Harbor, you might hear the echo of their laughter carrying on the wind, the sound of a love that refused to stay buried. A family that refused to stay broken, and a story that reminds us all that sometimes, just sometimes, love really does conquer all. That, my dear friends, is how a billionaire's stunned recognition of his lost love and twin children on a park bench became something far more precious than any. Fortune it became a testament to the unbreakable bonds that connect one heart to another, across time, across distance, across every obstacle that stands between love and its ultimate destination, home.